Okay, well this is an absolute turn up for the books and we are thrilled to have Mr. Donal MacIntyre with us today. How are you?
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming. I mean, it's a great surprise for me. Why are you at WhaleFest? What are you doing here?
Well, I'm doing a kind of Newsnight interview with some of the politicians. But in general, I've done a lot of work in my journalism and broadcasting in the area of animal rights, and particularly the trade in illegal animals. And I've done a great deal of work with Born Free, specifically rescuing some dolphins over the last 2 or 3 years, working with them. And I'm kind of dragged in at the early stages when there's a concern that dolphins are kind of owned by characters, then the negotiations have to go through the night, and I've got to go in there, smoke and drink the shady characters and negotiate their release. So that's when I'm kind of dragged in.
So tell us about that. It's Misha and Tom, if I'm not mistaken. Tell the audience, tell myself, who are
Well, Misha and Tom are two young dolphins, and who were basically trapped in a swimming pool in a really rundown complex in Turkey, in Hirosanu. And it was just extraordinary. The water was so toxic and poisonous, they really had only a matter of weeks to live. And over in that complex, a group of women, predominantly women, called Dolphins Angels, so-called, they dubbed themselves that, fought really hard. And the problem is there's always complicated relationships, business relationships about the ownership of the dolphins. And then, of course, you've got all sorts of political interests there. And so they were fighting hard there. They got lawyers involved, but they connected with Born Free, who had the technical expertise to rescue the dolphins, which we did. It was a long fight. We rescued them, we took them from the pool, and then we released them into the wild, a protective sea enclosure, marine enclosure, and then released them, and then that became part of a real authentic study.
So before we talk about the release, let's talk about how you said how the angels, were they called?
Yeah, Dolphin Angels.
Dolphin Angels. How did you specifically become involved with Born? Were you already involved with Born Free at this point?
Yes, I'm an ambassador and patron with Born Free, and they have. So they called me in. I've done a lot of work with them and hosting conferences and trying to highlight stories for them. But in this respect, they were having problems negotiating with some of the people who may or may not have owned these dolphins. So I was brought in, and there was a lot of drinking, a lot of smoking, and trying to kind of negotiate these very, very difficult tolerances, because these guys were saying, we want this amount of money, because some of them had a share in the animals, and some of them were working and were owed money by others who had a share, and they were saying, unless we get this amount of money tomorrow, we're going to shoot them. So it was a really
and
frightening.
What goes through your mind when you're faced with this dilemma? If I don't do something, then those dolphins could be shot. What?
Well, it's really difficult because you're working across cultural divides, and some of them are Russian, some of them were Turkish. All of them were desperate to some degree. None of them really had the animals at all, except as a commercial entity at the forefront of their minds. So you're just trying to, in many ways, it was a holding pattern, and it was about engaging with them. So I don't smoke, and I will enjoy a drink as much as anybody, but whatever they drank, I drank. Whatever they smoked, I smoked. So it was like traditionally when I used to do undercover work for the BBC, smoking, and I've done several anti-smoking public commercials, can I just say, but I did went undercover, and people would write in and say, that bloke smokes like a 16-year-old girl. You've got to do what you've got to do. But you had to do, and you mirror their behaviour, and by mirroring your behaviour, they kind of open up with you, and you share a cigarette, you share a drink, and then you kind of make it very human. And then you say, well, no, like Born Free did, they kind of looked out, helped, because you can't go in and just take the animals, because that is not possible. You'd be arrested, or the animals would be killed. So it takes so when we see the animals released and rescued, you have to understand the huge work and kind of nearly ambassadorial and kind of efforts that go into managing this, as well as the legal issues.
And how long did that take, that process from the negotiations?
Well, yeah, it probably took 6 months. Wow. Meanwhile, we were going in there, and I was going in covertly filming to one degree. Then we sent in a vet to test the animals, to test the water, water, because we were saying, well, we need to test the animals, test the water to ensure they'll be protected. And then the heritage of some of the animal trainers there are usually from Russian military. So they again have a very mechanistic view of the animals.
Rather than being emotionally connected to them.
And zero emotional connection.
It's terrible. So what was that kind of, what was their condition like? Did you go there in person?
Yeah, no, I was there.
What was their health like?
They were in really ragged order, but born free. Again, this is really expensive, and it's frontline medicine. And so they were in very, very poor shape, so they had to be rescued. And of course, the other thing is politically for Born Free, they're investing a huge amount of their resources in there. And in any organisation, it's like, should we be committing these resources for these two animals? But they became a trophy for the cause to say we can rescue these animals and we can actually fight the good fight. And these two animals became the kind of arrowhead for the cause within Turkey. So they did rescue them, they did protect them, and they did release them. But it genuinely was a Free Willy moment to have all Born Free there and the people who had shared in the journey, the rescue, to see them finally released. And they weren't related, but they'd spent so much time together. We expected the two animals to go off together and as pals. No, they didn't. They went off in completely separate
it just shows they probably didn't like each other that much.
They probably didn't like each other.
So, and that's a real thing, that obviously they're put into these places together, and it doesn't, in the wild they'd be free to roam. But how did you feel, I mean, obviously first they were in the pens. How did you get them from the pool that they were into the pens, and what was that process like? Was it a difficult one? Yeah,
well, we had to take them in makeshift. I think it was they arrived in a vegetable. They were dumped in the pool in a very old, literally vegetable van. And then we had to basically get them in a refrigerator van and get them and have them watered with ice and water continually over 2.5, 3 hour journey in very difficult terrain, and basically stretch them into the water. But they made the journey. I mean, it was well planned, but anything could have gone wrong. And we arrived, and of course, at any stage, the decision could have been made, no, you're not taking them away. A local politician could have interfered. But no, we came down about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, we whisked them away, and we placed them in the Marine Reserve. And but the delicacy of those negotiations, not with me, but particularly with those of Born Free, were very acute, and those tolerances were really, really sharp. But they were released. And I think the other thing for these, not only the animals and their release represent a great victory for the cause, but also because they were monitored medically throughout, and they had tags, and we could monitor their progress and success for some time afterwards.
Well, we'll talk about the precedent that was set from this in a second, but when it came to the release, what did that mean to you? Personally, how did you feel?
Yeah. Well, I went over there, and I was filming. So when I went out over there for Born Free, I did a lot of the filming and indeed interviewing myself. This is a very low-key reporting, much of which many of you students do. And I was the newsreader at London Tonight at the time, and so we brought over and shot some of the report ourselves for ITN News. So it was a great culmination in this. I was happy just to play a very small role and be able to promote the work of everybody, particularly dolphin agents, because these were ordinary housewives or workers or real estate agents who suddenly became so, disgusted at the treatment of these animals. They felt they had to do something. And because they were expats, they're in a kind of vulnerable position. So they just took up the cause.
Was it emotional for you though?
It was, yeah. And although there is always a mixture between me, I just want the job done.
Yeah. And
I think there was mostly it was about relief, sheer relief that the animals, had made it this far. And then again, once they were released into the wild, that was only the beginning of another whole kind of adventure, and a sense that we must protect these animals. I think it was Misha who kept going towards some fishing grounds and towards some ports, and Tom went elsewhere. But so it was always delicate, but it achieved a great deal. And I think Born Free in particular, I know I am one of their ambassadors, that I saw from the inside out really how hard they worked, and I think it was a brave and ultimately very successful mission for them.
And when you said that they went their own way, do you think that signifies something very, very poignant, that these dolphins are taken from the wild, and and they're torn from their mothers, and then they're put in these tanks with other dolphins that they may not particularly like, whereas in the wild they could go out.
Yeah.
Misha and Tom went separate ways.
Yeah.
How are they doing now?
Well, I haven't got the latest update, but I think the point you make is absolutely relevant, is that enforced capture of these sentient, beautiful creatures. And I am against captivity in any respect whatsoever, and I'm aware the debate has changed, and many people here may not quite understand the debate, and for those who have ever swum with dolphins, I acknowledge it is an amazing, uplifting experience, but it's not an appropriate experience, and it's not fair that we should, see them as creatures of entertainment. But I think part of the of this great event here, and of the work that other organisations, including Born Free, do, is to actually remind the public that. And I think we are winning the war, and I think particularly we've seen battles against SeaWorld, and I think all these campaigns are getting traction, and I think they're making a real difference.
And what do you think the viewers, the audience here today, myself, what do we need to do to make this move in the right direction even faster? Catalyze it?
Well, I think first of all, I think do what many of the young people here are doing, which is they're reading up, they're making up their own minds, they're aware that their own intimate experience with animals, whether they see them on TV or they see them at close quarters, that we don't own these creatures. These creatures are for future generations, and in order to respect them, we've got to distance ourselves from these great creatures. So I think once young people in particular may go over and discover and check out the information for themselves, and the argument is won.
Yeah. Well, if you can look at that camera right there, and say one thing to them about marine parks and things like that, what would you say to them right now?
Well, we don't own these animals. We have no right to enforce contact with these animals. Let them be free in the wild, and that is the greatest gift we can give to these great creatures.
Donal, thank you. Give him a massive round of applause for that.